Thank you for joining us for the Digital Graphics on Awnings and Structures webinar presented by PAMA, Professional Awning Manufacturers Association. My name is Dan Litster with Glen Raven Custom Fabrics, and I will be moderating the webinar today. This webinar will educate all attendees on various methods for applying graphics to awnings and outdoor structures. We encourage you to ask lots of questions at the end, but before we get started, I wanted to mention that this webinar will be recorded and it will be posted in the Resources tab on the PAMA Division website. Please note that a brief survey will pop up automatically when the webinar concludes, and you'll have 2 chances to complete it, both at the end of the webinar and in a follow-up email. We do value your feedback, as it's the only way of really expanding and improving educational content we provide to you. So we do hope that you can fill that out. We'll be placing all attendees on mute throughout the webinar to minimize background noise. If you have any questions, please type them in the questions function of the GoToWebinar toolbox that's on the right side of your screen, and I'll moderate those questions at the end of the webinar. So at this time, I'm very happy to introduce our speaker for today's webinar. This is Anthony Papalardo. He's the sales manager for Dixon Coatings USA, which is a manufacturer of coated textiles for the shade, structure, and graphics industries. He's spent his entire 20-year career in the shade and graphics business. Prior to Dixon Coatings, he was a site manager for Trivantage, Colorado, and was a senior account representative for Astra. He has an extensive knowledge of printing on outdoor textiles, from woven acrylics to coated vinyls and laminates. He is very passionate about print technology and innovation in textiles, as you'll shortly find out. Anthony is currently on the board of directors for the Fabric Graphics Association, a division of the IFAI. And we will begin the webinar now. Welcome, Anthony.
Well, thanks, Dan. I appreciate that, and welcome everybody. And today we want to discuss printing on outdoor textiles and kind of where we're at as an industry and maybe where we're going, and some of the innovations that we've seen coming. So with that, we'll unveil the curtains here, and we'll discuss digital graphics on awnings and structures. So how this kind of came about was I spent a lot of my 20-year career in many awning shops across the U.S. and Canada for sure. And also, I've gotten into, in the last 10 years, paying more and more attention to graphics on awnings and specifically digital graphics. And in my current role at Dixon Coatings, we are really big manufacturers of graphics products, that we sell to both the graphics industry and then shade products to the awning industry. So it crosses over quite a bit. And I get a lot of questions when I go into awning shops and so forth regarding, how do I print on materials, or what are my available options? So that's where this all started. All right. Before we talk about digital, I just wanted to touch on the available graphics technologies that we've done in the past and we're currently still doing. And there's nothing wrong with any of these. They're just mostly labor intensive and take a little more time, and you can only do so many colors with a lot of this. So traditional hand painting, many people still do the hand painting technique. It works really well on acrylics and vinyls. It's typically using outdoor acrylic paint with some kind of mask. Some people do hand paint it without a mask, but most shops I've seen will use some kind of mask. Pressure-sensitive films sticks to most vinyl coated products and vinyl laminated products. There's a lot of options out there to keep in mind, from cast to calendar films. You really should consult with the vinyl manufacturers on that stuff as to what they suggest. I know for laminates, they suggest a particular film over another. Applique, which is sewn or welded lettering. Seen that a lot in the past. I still see it out there once in a while. Eradication, really popular in the 80s and 90s. my goodness, when I think I started in 99 with Astra, there must have been 20 eradicable products on the marketplace, backlets, that type of thing. They're expensive and not very forgiving. If you made an error with the eradication fluid, it was never an easy fix, put it that way. And they're quite expensive. And today, backlit fabrics just aren't preferred by municipalities. So we've seen that go by the wayside. There's really only a handful of backlit eradicable products on the market today. It's just not in favor at this point. And then finally, digital. So the digital graphics, as I write here, creates a complex designs, and they're printed directly to the substrates or films. And you can do many, many colors. You can do very complex things that are preferred by modern businesses that want their logos and pictures and so forth. And I'll show examples of that. And there's other techniques available to them that maybe I didn't touch on. So, but we just wanted to touch on the basics. So digital print options. How do we get into this? For the most part, you purchase a machine, some software to run the machine, and most of the time you're going to want some kind of dedicated computer. You could do that. The second option is you can work with what we call a local print service providers, or PSP. You might see that term out there in a lot of graphics magazines. It just means people that do printing. Or you can work with a national awning or print company. So there's quite a few of those around now these days that will work with awning companies and provide that service for you. They're used to working with awning fabrics, and they know the business very well. One of the things maybe with working with a local PSP is they don't know the same fabrics that you know. While they may work with laminate fabrics and they may work with coated fabrics for different graphic applications, they might not know the specific brands that you're using. So that's where working with a national awning company that has digital printers, that might be to your advantage there. Okay, factors to consider for digital. Really, does it make financial sense to invest in a machine? That's a big thing for everybody, right? Am I going to get the return on my investment? Well, that really is a personal decision. You need to ask yourself, how much money am I spending on graphics per year? If I buy a machine, am I going to get that return? How long is that going to take? If you're only doing a couple jobs a year, it probably doesn't make sense to buy a whole setup for yourself. You may want to consider working with the local PSP or the National Awning Company. Because your initial investment for a 64-inch wide machine will run you somewhere around $20,000. Now, that's just a very general number after studying what it might cost for solvent, Eagle solvent, UV, or latex, plus the printer, plus the dedicated computer, plus your software. So $20,000 around that for a 64-inch wide machine. You're looking at $80,000 and up for a 126-inch machine. So that's like what they call a 3-meter machine. That can run you up to $500,000. Now that's a big number, but there's big differences in those machines too. So you'll see that it's all about speed. It's all about the quality of the image. It's all about that, right? So how fast do these machines go? And we're not going to talk about specific machines today. You'll see some pictures of some different ones, but you can talk to the different companies that make them, and you'll see the reasons for that. The big thing for awning company here is you need dedicated space and shop. So you can't put these machines in a dirty environment because you have to have a clean, dust-free space. I've been in a lot of awning shops, and some are really, really clean, and it's impressive. And some are not so clean. And the ones that are not so clean are not really set up to have a digital printer in there. You really need a room that is separate, that you're not going to have dust and debris flying all over the place, because once that gets onto the print or into the air, it could really ruin the image badly. You can clog print heads and that type of thing. And so you don't want residue to be on the fabric, okay? you really need a qualified employee to run the machine. Sometimes we don't think about that, right? I mean, maybe you have people right now that are technical enough. Maybe you have a guy that went to college and he's really good on computers and so forth. You can train people, and I know that the different companies will come in and train you when you buy the machine. That's fine. It's always good to have somebody that has a background in print. That's pretty universal. And again, I mentioned it. Is it best to work with a PSP? Maybe. It's just, again, depends on how much printing you're doing. Roll-to-roll machine. So when we talk about a roll-to-roll machine, it's loaded on the back side or sometimes the front side, and it rolls through the machine and goes to a secondary take-up roll. All right, so there's two rollers there. Now, those take 3-inch cores. Now, keep in mind, say when you're buying your fabric from your distributor, those are mostly 2-inch cores, right? So something to keep in mind when you send the fabric to somebody that might be doing the printing for you, that needs to be re-rolled onto a 3-inch core. And most of the time, maybe they'll do that for you. But every time you touch the material, you have to make sure it's 100% clean, right? You don't want your dirty hands on it because that will really mess up the image. So you got to be careful about that too. And one of the manufacturers of substrates or awning fabrics I've talked to over the years has said to me, be careful with the silicone residue on the fabric from a sewing machine. So if you've sewn the panel and you're going to send it off to be printed, or you're going to print it in-house, be real careful with the silicone that might be on the fabric. You need to wipe that off with some alcohol and be very careful about what gets left on the fabric. You'll have problems with the print. Okay. One of the things that I really love about this market for graphics is that it's not just a seasonal thing. So you can, for instance, we obviously know that different areas around the country, the awning business is very seasonal, and it's subject to, the pitfalls of the economy, and it's subject to pitfalls of, the weather. You can't control the weather. But what's nice about the graphics business is that it is a year-round business. And yeah, okay, so maybe around Christmas time, it's really up for people doing retail work, but people always need graphics for banners and wall graphics, displays, events, retail. If you're in a town with a college, pay attention next time to how many graphics are actually in all those buildings, from the wall graphics to banner stands to the pole banners, all sorts of different things. There's a real opportunity there for you to work with the different environments for colleges and frankly retail. We do so much business in retail. Just think of all the stores out there, and they're constantly changing up their displays. So my point on that is, if you do decide to get into the graphics business, having a dedicated person or even staff that's doing sales to different industries and so forth, there's lots of opportunities for you to expand your business. And the graphics business is growing so much every single year. There's opportunities for you to get involved in that. Okay, I wanted to talk about basic available awning fabrics that I'm going to show you some pictures of here. And I'm not going to mention brands. So we all know the different brands out there, but solution dyed acrylic, right? We all use that a lot. Solution dyed polyester for some of the FR stuff, vinyl coated polyester, and vinyl laminates. So those are really the 4 major different fabrics we're using on awnings these days. And then the digital technology. So I mentioned there's really 4 major technologies that you can print awnings: solvent, eco-solvent, which are really the 2 older technologies, but they're still very good, UV, and latex. And I'll show you the different machines, and we can describe or discuss the benefits of each one. But first, I wanted to go over the SGS graphics. So we all have probably heard of that technology today. So the SGS is a system that you print a digital image on a specific 3M film, and that is then placed on a 5 by 10 table, and the film is placed over the fabric. The lid's closed, and a combination of heat and pressure adheres the image to the fabric. And on the right-hand side, you'll see what an SGS graphic looks like. And it's a very good technology. And technically speaking, that is digital print, okay? You're somewhat limited sometimes by the colors you can do on this. And but for me, it's a really good modern technology that was developed that many people are using right now. And here's some of the different colors and so forth. So it really pops on black fabric nicely. You can see that this boutique, could use their logo and image and so forth, and it looks very nice. Here's another one that's been widely circulated. But you can see this one is nice because it shows a little more of a complex logo and image that's been transposed onto the fabric. I really like this one. I took this off the internet. This is really cool, and it shows you what you can do with the SGS stuff because you have alternating gray, I think that's cadet gray and buttercup, gray and yellow awnings that have been sewn. I think that's sewn together. It's either sewn or welded. But then they transposed and put the graphic yellow onto the gray and then gray onto the yellow, and it just gives you a really cool design look. I thought this was pretty brilliant. All right, I'm going to start talking now about the solvent and eco-solvent machines, and they're very similar technologies. The solvent was really the first generation that's been around since I think the 90s, and it's a really good image quality these days onto the fabrics. It's great adhesion to the vinyls. All right, so when I say that, what I mean by adhesion is that the inks adhere to the substrate and they stay on there pretty well. And with good adhesion, you're less susceptible to scratching and things, and basically the ink flaking off. Okay, if you don't have like the perfect print, that could be a problem. But you get really good adhesion with solvent and eco-solvent. The inks are durable, and it's available in 64 to 197 inch. Now, most of the machines that you're going to see out there are 64. I put 197 on there because I've seen machines available that wide, but the vast majority of the machines are 64-inch wide. And I've seen a lot of awning shops have those machines in their shop, and a lot of them will use this type of technology in conjunction with the SGS. The downside of the solvent and eco-solvent is that it leaves a really bad smell. And because the solvent-based inks are pretty harsh. And so from a human health standpoint, they're not that great. And you need a good ventilation system in the shop. So if you get a solvent machine, you really should have some kind of good ventilation. Otherwise, it's going to smell really bad in the entire shop and office area. And, it's not good for your employees to be breathing in. And again, I mentioned it's not particularly eco-friendly. And you've seen some hospitals and schools ban the use of solvent and eco-solvent machines as the technology has evolved. Now, the difference between solvent and eco-solvent is that eco doesn't mean it's more eco-friendly. It's actually economical. So when that came out, it was more economical inks and machines. And they've evolved a little bit, whereas you barely see regular solvent machines being made anymore. It's mostly you'll see eco-solvent machines by the major manufacturers. Okay, the one that I see a lot out there these days, particularly in the graphics business, and it's very good technology, is UV printing. And UV, how this works is that the print head lays down ink onto the fabric, And then if you look at the bottom picture, you'll see this really intense UV light that then hits the ink and cures it almost immediately. And there's a lot of, it's very fast. And these machines, a lot of them you'll see are 126-inch wide, so they're 3 meters wide. You'll see a lot of 5-meter wide machines, so you can do big graphics on these machines, and that's a huge benefit. There's some issues with ink flexibility on certain brands. Some are better than others. So I think when the UV technology first came out, and even just a couple of years ago, you had some problems with, you'd print onto the substrate, you would stretch it on a frame, and the inks weren't that flexible, so they start to crack. Well, that's a real problem in our industry, right? You don't want that. So the newer ones are better. Some of the machines, like you see up, the one up top, I see a lot of those in different shops across the U.S. They're great, great machines. So if you see maybe a print service provider with one of those Vuetex, you're dealing with somebody who knows what they're doing. But there's a lot of different UV manufacturers out there, from Mamaki to Vuetex to Durst. They all make really good stuff. We constantly have our materials printed on the different manufacturers' machines. It's all very good for the most part these days. And this technology, you'll see what's great about UV, and then I'm going to talk about latex. What's great about those technologies is those are the ones that manufacturers are investing their resources into these days. It's not really solvent and eco-solvent. So as you see that, the UV and the latex technologies are evolving, and they're getting much, much better. And so they're getting more durable, and particularly for outdoor. The thing with UV printing, there is a little bit of odor after printing, but certainly not to the extent of the solvent and eco-solvent. So I can tell when I walk into a shop if they're printing solvent, like it hits you right away. It hits your senses. You can't be mistaken. UV, I can smell it a little bit, but it's not anything that bothers me. And these machines, they go anywhere from 64 to 197. You might find some that are smaller than that. They're certainly available, but honestly, for awnings and structures, I don't know why you would buy anything less than 64-inch. Just all the fabrics are, 60 and above. So, okay, latex. So latex is major out there right now. There's a lot of latex machines that are out on the market, and they make a fantastic product. It's the most eco-friendly of all the technologies. There's absolutely no smell to it. It's utilizing water-based inks. And the thing with latex, the adhesion's a little more surface oriented, so you have to be careful there. But when applied correctly, the graphic can last easily 3+ years outdoors. The technology is really good. The newer machines, so I would say the version 3 machines that are out there now, they're being sold, are all very, very good with the adhesion to the different fabrics. When this technology first came out, there was some issues because the ink is more surface oriented when it's laid down. You'd have some scratching easily done if it's not printed 100% correctly. From my point of view, that has dissipated quite a bit over the past year or two. We're seeing much better graphics being done with the latex machines and the new stuff. Now, I talked to some guys at HP. They definitely recommend that you apply a liquid UV lamination over the graphic. You can also do a UV or some kind of laminated film. Those are really the two options you can do. And they recommend that to protect the ink. It's not really to protect the fabric, it's to protect the ink. And I'll show you some pictures as to what I'm talking about, and you'll definitely see the difference. These machines go anywhere from 64-inch to 197-inch wide as well. And you'll see a lot of different versions of these machines out there. And a lot of them are the same kind of technology. It's just the speed, the take-up, the automated process, and all these different ones. Then that's really the difference. All right. The big question is the life expectancy of the images. sorry to say there's no universal answer to this. It's better than it used to be, but each circumstance is certainly different. You have the quality of the print. Like, is what machine are they using, or what machine are you using? Are you using a machine from 10 years ago? I would have to say that the latex when it first came out 10 years ago is not nearly as good as it is now. So the newer machines will do a better job adhering to most of the awning fabrics these days. UV is really the same thing. What's the quality of the print, right? So that's what you need to figure out. If you have a newer machine, honestly, it's better than they were, as I said, 10 years ago. Is an overlaminate used? So we just talked about that. Liquid lamination is widely regarded as a really good option when you're doing printing for outdoor exposure. And then the exposure, like what angle is the graphic going to be at? Is it a banner, or is it a 45 or 30 degree awning that's going to get a lot of exposure, from the west or the south or the east? It just depends, right? And so if it's going to get blasted with UV, the UV sun, it'll last a little bit longer than, say, it would maybe in the Midwest, where you don't have as much, right? But you still have the winters and all that stuff. The location, the desert Southwest versus Midwest versus the North, it's all a little bit different. And most manufacturers state that 3 to 4 years is a typical lifespan to expect with a UV laminate. All right. Okay. This is really good. One of the national printers shared this with me, and I think it shows pretty much what I'm talking about here. So you see on the left-hand side, you have a product printed that has an overlaminate over the top of it, and they put this outside in the back of their building for the last couple of years. I think this is maybe 2.5 years old, okay? And you'll see that the oranges on the left that have the laminate on them are much more orange. Particularly the reds are a lot less pink, right? The purple, and then look at the blue on the bottom. So the blue on the bottom left corner is still a good blue with the over laminate, and then no laminate on the right hand side. You can see it's turning gray. Here's another view where you can see the whole picture. So it really depends on that technology that you're utilizing. All right, so I wanted to discuss here, or really just show you different pictures of some of the different things that are being done right now across the U.S. So this is some kind of tent structure, for a motorsports event. You see a lot of these out there, but you can see all the nice print that they did on this and the advertising you can do. Here's a digital awning down south. You can see there, obviously it's for a cafe, but they're showing, pretty blatantly what it is that they do. They do hamburgers and they do, breakfast and smoothies, and you know exactly what it is that they're offering. Theme parks. I saw this in person recently. I was kind of impressed by it, and you can see here that this isn't necessarily an awning, but they're having different graphics done here. And then in the very background, I'm going to use my pointer, you'll see that there's this shade structure up top here that's mimicking the same type of thing there. So I thought that was pretty interesting. Okay, here's the digital awning. I really like the contrast and colors that they did on this one. Yeah, you see these a lot too. These race awnings are typically, I think, they're printed on like a polyester fabric, pretty lightweight, but they roll up really easily, and they're digitally printed. We've probably all seen these ones. Obviously, a national chain of purveyors of bagels and sandwiches and soups. But this is I think, a really well done branding that they did here. Because I remember the older awnings that they used to do. They look nice, but these ones really stand out. And these are all digitally printed. This one's pretty in your face. You see these, if you're in Europe and you go to different cities, this is pretty popular. You'll see pretty bold graphics on some of these awnings, but you know exactly what they do. It's telling their story. Yeah, and here's a good one, done out of a vinyl coated polyester, but it's printed with white ink. And you can do a nice logo on these shade structures for different car parks and so forth. Auto dealerships, you see a lot of that down south here in the U.S., where they've got these big, expansive shade structures over the cars. But you can obviously put advertising and all that. You can put whatever you want. Event structure. So I mentioned in the beginning the different things that you could do, besides awnings, right, and structures. You could do these events, Barilla Pasta, right? We've all seen that in the grocery stores. Well, they obviously sponsored this event here, and they've got some advertising going on. They've got some kind of tent and an entryway into I don't know. I guess they're serving pasta inside there, right? But there's an awful lot of printed fabric there. It's very popular. I've seen different events. I was out in Colorado for about 12 years, and there was a bicycle race that went through there, and there was a company out that way that did a lot of different structures like this here that I'm showing you for the different start and finish lines. And then shade structures, right? So these guys were making these, they're basically umbrellas, right? They're umbrellas and shade structures here, but they then printed the company logo on there, and they printed the Coca-Cola logo on there. There's all sorts of things that you can do with these different fabrics. And pole banners, right? Very basic banner system, but you can see how detailed that you can get. This World of Beer banner that I really like the way that it looks like wood. It looks a little bit different, and they've got their logo on it. That looks really great. The one on the right was one of our fabrics used at South by Southwest on all the street poles this year. And so it was all throughout the city. They changed up the imagery. They changed up the different colors on the different streets. There's a lot of this stuff that goes out there. I mean, you go by hospitals, you go by schools, you go by museums, right? They've all got these pole banners all over the place, and somebody's got to do them. It's usually these graphics print companies in the area, but there's no reason why I think that as awning and structure shade shops, we can't get involved in that as well. Okay, that concludes my presentation, and I think at this time, if you guys have any questions, I'm more than happy to try to answer them.
Great. Thank you, Anthony. Nice job. Boy, our industry's come a long way, and from Helvetica letters on a in white on a valance, hasn't it? Amazing. So we've already got a couple of questions right now. So at this time, I'll ask that anyone who has a question, please do submit it in the questions box there on the right side of your screen. And Anthony, I've got the first question I'm going to give you is a two-part question. And this one, I've heard this question asked before, so it's a good one. Here's the question, Anthony. Can you direct print to sewn or welded panels, or must you first print and then assemble? And then then the person asks the second portion of that question, that is, and is that different from a heat transfer SGS application?
Yeah, that is a little different. And I've seen both done. What the answer is yes, you can do that. What happens when you weld the seam, of course, is that you're changing the surface of the fabric, right, a little bit. I think what you probably want to do first is weld the fabric and then print it. Because what happens is I've seen guys that they try to print it and then weld it together. And think about what happens in the welding process. You're melting the fabric together essentially. And when you're going to apply the heat like that to that graphic, you're probably going to change the color of that surface. So it's going to look weird. So I would definitely say if you're welding it, I would print it afterwards. Same thing really with sewing, although you can probably get away with sewing it afterwards a little easier than welding it. And then the second part of that question is on the SGS system. Yeah, actually that is a different process, because in the SGS system you're printing onto a film. We're talking digital, right? You're printing onto the film, which is then transferred onto the graphic, or excuse me, onto the awning with heat and pressure on that table we talked about. Whereas if you're printing directly to fabric, there's no film involved in it. So you're putting the fabric straight through one of those machines I showed, and the graphic goes straight onto fabric. I've seen, this kind of goes into a little bit of a different topic. I've seen where people have tried to print directly onto acrylics. I've seen it done. It's not a widely accepted, recognized way to do it. There are some problems with it just based upon the fact that it's extremely water repellent, right? And just that those acrylic fibers, they don't tend to want to accept the graphic directly. But with UV printing, which will print directly and cure almost immediately onto the fabrics, we may see some things over the next few years where that changes, and you can do that. But right now, I would say printing on acrylics, the best option to me is printing with that SGS system.
And Anthony, there's kind of a follow-up question that I see asked a couple times here, and that is to reference. I know you've talked about the SGS, but they're asking about SignTech machines that are out there in the field, and are they also do they also work just fine for heat transfer graphic applications?
I'm sorry, I don't know much about the SignTech machines, so I'm not the guy to answer that one.
Gotcha. They are some older machines that were out there that were they're also light tables with the vacuum that were originally put out into the field back in the Panaflex days.
Oh, goodness. Oh, okay. Yeah, Panaflex SignTech. Right. All right. If they're older machines, I can't recommend it just because I'm not familiar with it, but I would say, that's probably a case-by-case basis. The technology for the SGS, it's very good. It's tried and true, and it is recommended by the manufacturer of the major acrylic stuff that we see here in the U.S. They know it works on their product. The SignTech machine, it may be a similar machine. I would say you just have to try it and use it. That's what I have on that.
And a follow-up, what is the recommended 3M film for use on awning fabrics? I know there's quite a variety out there of films that 3M does offer. Is there a specific film recommended?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So that major manufacturer of the acrylic stuff, they have that 3M film specified when you buy that machine. I think it is. So there's different films out there, okay? And they have the 3M films, like the film 220, 225, 180. It's really for different printing with different inks. So it really depends on what you're printing with, and it's available on the SGS website, which is where I plucked it off of. But there's like a 3M Scotch Cal graphic film series is really the name of it, and I think there's like 10 different ones you can use just based upon the ink and then what you're printing on. And there's different, I didn't touch on the warranty either on that SGS system. It's a little bit complicated too. That SGS warranty, it goes anywhere from 1 to 5 years, depending on a lot of different things, from the exposure of is it an awning? Is it a vertical application? Is it in the desert Southwest? All of these have a factor of whether it's got a 1-year warranty or a 5-year warranty. And there's a sheet for that is available on that website.
Gotcha. Very good. Another question is, what is the best mask for solution dyed acrylics? So I'm assuming that has to do with painted graphics.
Yeah. Gosh, Dan, back in the day when we were at a distributor, I know that there was a product that was called Action Art Mask, but I don't think it's available anymore. I can't recall what the replacement was for that stuff, or what people were using.
It's called FabTac.
That's right. Okay, thank you. Yeah,
you're welcome.
So FabTac is used pretty regularly as a brand, and it works really good on acrylics. I think it's specifically formulated for that. And I think it comes in like 15-inch and 30-inch wide rolls. Maybe it comes wider these days. I don't know. But for the most part, for painting on graphics, that's what people are using. And they just use it. They run that stuff through a plotter, and then it gets applied, and they paint it.
Great. And so when you're looking at different types of fabrics, is there a best printing process for polyester fabrics that have high water repellency? So meaning, is there a preparation that's necessary depending on the printer or the inks that you're using?
Yeah, for polyester, polyester and acrylics are probably in the same boat. I mean, we make a lot of polyester product at Dixon for the graphics business and our eco-friendly stuff, and we actually put a coating over the top of it to accept the graphics. So it depends on the brand that we're talking about, number one, and you really. And I'm never going to say you can't 100% do something, because I've seen people do things I never thought was possible with the different changing technologies and so forth. But really, probably the best system to use direct to print or direct onto the fabrics, particularly polyester or acrylic at this point, if there's no coating over the top of it, is probably that SGS system. We know that works. That works with acrylics, that works with polyesters, that works with vinyls. Frankly, you can do that on vinyls. The solvent, eco-solvent UV latex, most of the time those are being done onto vinyls at this point, if we're talking about outdoor textiles.
Gotcha. And then I do have a couple quick questions here on liquid laminates.
Yeah.
And the first question is, does the liquid laminate go over only the printed area, or is it designed to cover the entire substrate?
Yeah, good question, Dan. You can do it. It's really to protect the ink, right? But I think the problem may be if you only put it over the inked surface, you might see it be a little glossier, perhaps. Even though they try to make that stuff matte, it might look a little different than the rest of the awning. So I have seen people, when they apply that stuff, they apply it directly over the entire surface of the substrate. And a lot of the guys, let's talk about that a little bit too. There's a few different ways to apply that liquid laminate or the film laminate. All the big guys, when they're doing that stuff, there's a machine that essentially will apply that liquid laminate over the fabric evenly and smoothly. Because the other option that you have is you could roll it on with a paint roller. Now, if you think about that, it might work or it will work, but you might not get an exact even distribution of that laminated surface. So you might have like globs of laminate that, it might, in other words, you might have more surface build up in one spot than another, and it might not look that great in the end when it's in the sun and you couldn't see it in the shop. Um, so we don't really recommend that. There's also a spray can, like one of the major manufacturers of that stuff. They sell it in spray cans. Yeah, you could do that too, but you kind of have the same problem that you do with rolling on. So these liquid lamination machines are really the best option for this. Um, they're they're pretty common out there. I see them quite a bit in the different industries that we serve. Does that answer your question? Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. And I think too, just there's a follow-up question there to this, and I think the answer here is no, but I don't want to weigh in. And that's the question is, does liquid lamination affect the FR qualities of a FR substrate?
Aha, that's a very good question. I know that's something that we test ourselves at Dixon. It depends upon the manufacturer of the liquid lamination. So I know that the manufacturers of fabrics don't like stuff being applied to the finish of their product that would affect any kind of performance. And so you really need to check with the different fabric manufacturers that you're working with. Now I know that so many companies now are coming out with fabrics that we promote as digitally printable, and I would think that those companies understand that there's going to be something applied to the fabric, and I'm sure that they'll stand behind the actual fabric 100%. The graphics a whole nother game. Like that's another animal. But to the point of the question, does it affect the FR? It depends on the liquid lamination you're using. There are FR versions of the liquid lamination that I've seen out there. There's two companies that I've seen. I'm not promoting brands here, okay, guys, but there's two major companies I see that make this stuff. One of them is called Clear Shield. It's actually that's the brand. It's made by a company called Marabou. They're distributed nationally. They have a lot of you can get that stuff in a lot of different places from distributors of graphics products. They make a really good product. They make a lot of different versions of their product. A lot of their stuff is made for lamination on like wall graphics and things like that, which is kind of hard. I came into them, but they have a lot of different versions of their product. For some of it has more UV resistance than others. Some of it has different FR versions of it. So you really have to pay attention to what it is you're buying, because there are multiple versions of that stuff. There's another company, I don't know the actual name of the manufacturer, but the brand is called Frog Juice. Sounds strange, but that's what the name of the product is. That's another liquid lamination that is available out there. So if you want to take a look at those two, if you want to Google it or whatever, you'll see that Marabou has that company I know because I've talked to them. They have a lot of different versions of their product.
Gotcha. Here's another good question here is, how does dye sublimation process fit in today's awning and graphic structures? Graphics.
Yeah, so that's not really. I'm never going to say you won't be able to dye sub onto awning fabrics. That's a different kind of fabric, though. Usually the dye sub is done onto an uncoated surface, and it's a dispersed ink method. It's just a different way. It's a different technology. At this point, like you wouldn't be able to take a typical awning fabric that we were talking about today and dye sublimate onto it. I mean, maybe in the future they'll come up with some kind of technology to do that with, but most of the dye sub work that you see being done, I actually see a lot of like those pop-up tents. Like a lot of that's dye sub, but that's a different cut of fabric. Remember. And then also we see a lot of dye sub on interior graphics, but for outdoor awnings and structures, it's not a widely recognized method for outdoor use.
Gotcha. And I think Anthony, I'm gonna take one last question here, and this one is probably one you can probably expound upon for a bit. So this person is asking about diversifying their business and are interested in purchasing a printer, but they're really not sure where to start. How do you go about buying the machine?
That's a great question. So there's obviously there's different distributors than maybe you're used to dealing with. And there's different companies you're used to dealing with. The first place I would probably start is go to a trade show that deals with graphics, and so there's a lot of different ones around. The one that just took place in Vegas was the ISA, which is the International Sign Association. That's a huge show. There's like 20,000 people that attend that. There's hundreds and hundreds of vendors. You get to check out the machines. This is the great part about the trade shows. You get to see the machines in action. You get to see them printing on the different fabrics, and most importantly, you can talk to all the representatives from the different machines, because there's a lot of them out there. Like the difference between the brands, like what makes a machine $500,000 and another machine, $20,000. I mean, there's a huge difference in that stuff, and maybe you don't need that $500,000 machine. You probably don't, unless you're pumping out graphics all day long. The other thing you could possibly do, and by the way, there's a lot of regional shows for graphics. There's one called NBM. I think they have like 6 or 8 of them across the U.S. that take place in different periods across the U.S., so different times. So like every month or two, there's a different one that's in the different regions. You can go to that show and check out the manufacturers as well. The other thing to do is just go to the websites of the companies. You could Google, latex and find out, and obviously they'll have an area there where you can put in your region, and if you're interested in receiving more information. There's a lot of different companies out there that distribute the machines, so you might get better service by dealing with a local guy, because I'm sure you guys will have questions about this stuff, right? So you want somebody that can service the machines locally. You don't want to have to be waiting for some technician to fly in from a far off place. If your machine's down, you're in trouble. So somebody that can service a machine locally. So some of these distributors that sell the product, they sell at a pretty competitive price. And one of the little secrets on the machines is, part of the reason that they're pretty affordable is these guys, they make more of their money on the inks and things like that than they do on the actual sale of the machine. So that's why they try to make them affordable. That's why the cost of entry is relatively small. You can get an HP latex machine for $14,000-$15,000. By the time you add the computer, by the time you add the software, the installation, all that stuff, you're closer to 20 grand. But it's a pretty reasonable entry into the market, if you think about it. So I hope that answers that question. I would look up, the different graphics distributors in your area, and they're everywhere. So there's quite an option list out there.
I'm going to sneak one last question on you, because a couple people asked this very same question, and that is, with all the HDPE shade sail fabrics that are out there, what's the best way to apply graphics to those?
That's a really, really tricky question. That's a different substrate, and things tend not to stick to that stuff. I don't have the answer for you. The other real problem with that is, if you think about how that is all working, you're stretching the fabric a lot, and because it's under tension, right? When you stretch the fabric, obviously you're stretching the ink. And one of the main concerns with one of the main guys here in the U.S. that does the printing for a lot of awning companies is, like, particularly with UV, you start stretching that stuff, or the UV print, you start stretching that stuff, and it's problematic. And it'll start to crack, and you don't really want inks that, or you don't want the technology. You don't want to set the ink down. You get your beautiful image, right? And now you're stretching the fabric, and now you're changing that image. You're changing the structure of the graphic. So I'm sorry to say, I think at the present time, there's not like a great way, unless somebody else has some suggestions, not like a great way to print onto that material. There's some different fabrics out there, other than HDPE for those shade sails. I know there's an acrylic version of that, and you can definitely print on that stuff. But again, you're stretching it, so it becomes a little bit. It becomes a tough question.
Gotcha. Well, I didn't mean to save the toughest question of the group for last, Anthony, but that's kind of how that worked out.
No, it's fine. I wish I had a better answer on that, and I've actually thought about it myself for a while. Like, what would be the best technology for that? And at the present time, I don't have a universal answer for that. But if anybody comes up with one, I mean, please share it. I think the industry would be appreciative, because we definitely see more and more and more of those shade sails and those structures being put up.
Great. Well, thank you, Anthony. Job well done. Very informative. Great Q&A session here. Certainly appreciate it. So I just want to thank everyone for tuning in this afternoon. And Anthony, once again, thank you for your time and expertise. Just as a reminder for you or any of your colleagues that perhaps weren't able to attend the webinar, this webinar was recorded, and it is going to be posted under the resources tab on the PAMA website. And that's located like kind of right in the middle of the landing page under the resources tab, and there's a drop down and you'll be able to get it there. So PAMA does have a lineup of webinars for the next several months. So do stay tuned for details about our next webinar. And I again want to thank you all and have a great afternoon to everyone. And thanks again, Anthony.
You're welcome. My pleasure. And take care, everybody.